Welcome to Allergy Dragon's Lair. My name is Martha Morgan. I'm a specialty diet and allergy chef. I have celiac disease and a couple of food allergies. My biggest claim to fame is raising a child with over 30 food allergies and celiac disease. So most people know that I'm here in Louisville, Kentucky, and I have another great Louisville guest with me today. But before we jump into podcast episode or YouTube video, whichever platform you happen to be watching us, a quick disclaimer. The views expressed here on our show are the personal opinions and life experiences of ours and our guests. We are not healthcare providers or doctors. Please seek advice from your healthcare professional for any diagnoses or changes to your healthcare plan. End of disclaimer. Let's jump into this episode. I have with me somebody I met recently. Melissa Gregory Rue is really just a very cool person. And the more that we have connected, even though it's been predominantly online, but personally, it's been very cool getting to know Melissa. So Melissa, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
So thank you so much for having me, Martha. My name is Melissa Gregory Rue. I relocated back to Kentucky, specifically Louisville, at the beginning of the pandemic with my husband. I lived out in Oregon and Portland for almost 3 decades, and we came back to be closer to family. I've been dealing with health issues pretty much almost my entire adult life, and I'm in my early 50s now. So yeah, it's been a long road, and I've learned a lot, and I try to share and help other people as much as I can with what I've learned.
Again, thank you so much for being on the show. We spoke very briefly about the fact that you have Lyme disease when we first met. If you're comfortable with it, can you go ahead and kind of share some of your health conditions and things like that? I like to share people's stories. And amongst all of these things that I kind of know a little bit about, you're also, in the filmmaking industry and just doing really awesome things. Kind of a small question, but big answer type of thing.
Sure. In my late 20s, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. Well, actually, I wasn't officially diagnosed. I take that back. I had a doctor who said, you're borderline. We're going to start you on medication for your thyroid. It was like 25 years later, somebody actually said, yes, you have Hashimoto's. And I said, thank you. It's nice to know what to call this. I've been taking this medication for years. That was my first, that runs in my family. Both of my grandmothers had it. Not a big surprise. Very not uncommon in women in general. Once you get your thyroid levels stabilized on medication, theoretically, you shouldn't have any other problems. But my issue was after 3 or 4 years of, trying different levels of thyroid medication, I still had issues, and I kept having different weird things happen in my 30s. And every time I would, I called them flare. I just always said it's a flare up. And I think a lot of people who have nebulous kind of autoimmune stuff, that's what we say. And we don't know what else to explain, how to say it. But so eventually I worked my way to a really good naturopath after seeing 2 or 3. And she said, we're going to have to change your diet or you're not going to feel better. And so she said, no dairy, no gluten, no soy. I don't know how, but somehow I had a lot of willpower in my 30s. I don't know what happened to it, but at that, I did it. I just buckled down and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And so I started to feel better. And that time went on. Then I had an incident where I was stung by this very bizarre stinging insect. I don't know what it was. I had been camping in Mesa Verde, Colorado with a friend. We were driving down the highway like Thelma and Louise style, with the windows down and the air's blowing through, and it was so cinematic and wonderful. And all of a sudden this thing flies in the window and it stings me on my back and falls in the back seat and dies. Well, I screamed because it really hurt. And my friend almost had she almost wrecked the car. And so she whips the car off the road, and first thing she does is she gets that thing with something and she throws it out. Well, let me tell you something. If you are ever stung by something or have a tick come off of you or any weird thing attached to your body, you do not throw it out. You save it to send to a lab. Okay, that's the first thing. So that road trip, I was on the way to New Orleans, and my husband flew down to meet in New Orleans. And so I did have like this very bizarre reaction right after I got stung. We went to lunch in Durango. My friend got really angry with me because she said I was acting crazy. Like, she said, you were talking really fast and I couldn't keep up with you, and you were just like practically running away and you were sweating. And I was like, oh my God, I'm having anaphylaxis. Most people don't understand what that is. So she was still pissed off at me. She didn't care that I was having anaphylaxis. But so my husband gets down to New Orleans and we're getting ready to go. And I had been sleeping really weird. Like, I thought that the AC in the hotel we were staying in was not good or something, because I was sweating out, like totally sweating out at night trying to sleep. And then my husband saw my back and he's like, oh my God, what happened to you? And I hadn't really talked about it that much. And he's like, come here, look. And he's like, turn around, look in the mirror. And I had a bullseye rash that was like that big. And it was 3 different colors. It was like purple and then red hot and then like white hot in the middle. So he rushed me over to urgent care and they gave me a shot of cortisone. And the doctor brought in every person on staff to look at. They were taking photos. They were like, what is this? What's going on with this woman? And so they just, I think maybe they gave me like a week's worth of doxycycline or something, but this was in the like probably around 2007, 2008. And people in the South were not thinking about Lyme disease. Nobody was. I mean, we still have a lot of doctors in the South that are just completely oblivious. And so they said, when you get back to Portland, go to your allergist, get checked out. Okay, so I did that, and they tried to do immunotherapy on me. My allergist said, well, we need to check you for all stinging insects again. So they did my test. I was like super, super highly allergic to everything. So when they tried to do immunotherapy, I went into anaphylactic shock. And that's where they give you just like a tiny little bit of the venom. They did it twice, and both times I went into anaphylactic shock. So I ended up spending like half the day in the doctor's office, because you can't leave until all your vitals are back to normal. So then they said, well, sorry, we can't do it. They were like, can't do anything for you. Here's an EpiPen. But nobody checked me for Lyme disease. There's a really big misconception that you can only contract Lyme disease from a tick bite. I don't think I'm alone. I know I'm not alone, because I've talked to other people with Lyme disease who said there was something else that I contracted this from, like a spider bite, which I've had several of those too, actually. That's one of those things about infectious disease from, this is not new in developing countries, especially like in South America, Central America. If you've ever traveled there, about like all the different crazy stuff that you have to get vaccinated for, and the things that you can't even control, whether you might pick those diseases up. So we have a really big problem in the US, and it's not being addressed. Basically, we've got thousands upon thousands of people who are undiagnosed with Lyme disease. And then we have all of people like me who get diagnosed late, and it's so late in the game, it's really hard to treat, so there's no cure. Once you get it, if you get rid of it with the little bit of medication you get from a traditional doctor, that's great. But people who have compromised immune systems already, like I did, tend to end up with chronic Lyme disease. So that's how I got here.
That was a crazy story. Okay.
There's so many, I think the first time I had Lyme, I was actually in high school. So I think I had it. I had a weird illness in like my senior year in high school. And I grew up on a farm in Kentucky, and my dad took ticks off of us. Like, it was just like a regular thing, And so probably a lot of those ticks were not carrying something, but it's likely that something got a hold of me and made me really sick. And the doctors could never figure out what it was, but they thought it was mono, but it wasn't mono. That went on for like 3 months. And then my body was able to fight it off because my immune system was much stronger. So this is the thing I think that really confuses a lot of people about Lyme disease. They're like, well, they'll say something like, well, my sister got it and she got 2 weeks of doxycycline and she was fine. Well, okay, yeah, that hopefully, if you're lucky, that's how your story goes. If you have a strong immune system, you don't have other health issues underlying. But if you have things going on already and your immune system's not functioning well, then your body has a really hard time fighting off.
Yeah, and I think like when you have autoimmune diseases and things like that, you already have things that trigger us, like celiac disease usually is triggered. And in some people, maybe it doesn't get triggered until late in life or whatever trauma. Same thing for you on the Hashimoto's thyroidism, like when that gets triggered, which my sister also happens to have, and so does my one niece. So very common, unfortunately. You never know what switch you kind of like flip in your body. And it was probably just like that sting at that time just trigger that response for it to kind of like almost reactivate, in my opinion, sometimes. Like I said, I'm not a doctor, obviously, but sometimes I feel like there are things that lay dormant in your body, like you don't really necessarily get rid of it, but it's not flaring up at the time. So I think that there's that little teeter switches that flip it back all on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's, like I said, that was definitely an interesting story. I had never heard it either, everybody. So just in case, I didn't know your origin story.
Yeah. There it is.
And you still don't know what the heck stung you at all.
I'll never know. I mean, it was, I don't think I really saw it except for briefly before she threw it out, but it was very strange looking. When I finally got tested, so testing for Lyme is really, it's a big challenge because for years, most of the testing has been highly unreliable. Like I think the statistic is 50%. There's a 50% rate of people who test for Lyme, who have Lyme, who don't show as positive. Okay. So part of the problem, and there's a lot of politics around this, like in the medical, it's the most highly contentious disease in the medical community, as far as I can tell, because their doctors and scientists are still arguing about what constitutes positive testing for Lyme. And the US standards are not the same as the European Lyme disease specialist standards. So I go by the European because I think they know what they're doing more than the CDC and the NIH. And so that's a big issue. It's a big problem. I've tested at a variety of labs around the country. I have tested at a lab. I have testing from a lab in Belgium. And that's my most recent testing that said I'm positive for tick-borne relapsing fever, which completely made sense to me because that's kind of how my illness process is I'll go through months where I feel great. And then all of a sudden, just like with an autoimmune flare, something triggers it and I'm back into those symptoms again. And it was a very difficult time because I had just lost my father to pancreatic cancer. And I mean, I went from my dad's funeral to treatment, and I had watched my dad go through the worst experience, like most not compassionate, like disinterested cancer doctors and support staff. They were just, it was a horrible thing to watch my dad have to go through that. And so then I watched him do that, and I went and got the best treatment that I possibly could have gotten with completely amazing, compassionate nurses and people like really supporting me and a community that was supporting me. So I've been thinking a lot about that, like this, the way that our medical model should be changed. I think there's a big problem with the lack of community. Like, I think having that community part when people are in, fighting something like cancer or something that be fatal, like to have that, like a lot of people are just missing that element because of the way that our medical system is structured.
So with Lyme disease and the fact that you were able to take control of your healing, I'm a huge believer in that food is medicine. Your diet, you had to change it one time. Did you have to keep changing it for Lyme disease as well?
No, I mean, that was one thing when I went to Arizona for treatment, they said, okay, well, you're going to do the anti-inflammatory diet and you can't have this. I said, oh, I'm already doing all that. So yeah, that was nothing new. So that part was easy for me. There were lots of side effects from the antibiotic. It was like a cocktail there were like a variety of antibiotics I was getting, but it's integrative clinic. So I was also getting natural things to calm inflammation, because just like with all diseases, inflammation is a huge part. I mean, it's like what happens in your body with Lyme, and it can affect all the organs of your body. It can affect your eyesight. It can affect your brain. And so, I mean, when I was diagnosed, they said, yes, it had gone into my brain. And so there was a certain treatment that they did that actually was supposed to cross the blood-brain barrier to try and eliminate some of the bacteria out of my brain. Came out 60% better. I was sent home on doing herbs and natural, kind of more natural things, and I had a really hard time with the herbs, and I just said I don't think this is going to work for me because it just made me feel sick all the time. And so there's a part of with chronic Lyme, you kind of have to decide, like, am I doing well enough that I'm just going to go, okay, this is great, I'm just going to take it? Or are you going to, or do you feel like your symptoms are getting to the point where you need to do treatment again? And so I decided, after I finished my feature documentary last year, I was like, okay, I got this project is something I've been working on for a decade, on and off. And so after that, I said, after I finish this film and I launch it out, then I'm going to go find a Lyme specialist and see if maybe there's some other treatment I should do, because I do have some symptoms still, and they're not nearly as severe as what they were. But like one thing I'm having now, I'm starting to have blurry vision again. So I'm hoping that that's just something where I need a new prescription, but haven't found that out yet. Things, and I had been told by people, they said, you can go do these heroic type hardcore treatments for Lyme and they may help you, but the Lyme, they're not going to be able to get all of the bacteria, and eventually it's going to re-proliferate. Okay, so I'd had people tell me that, and I said, well, if I can, they said, but I heard people say, but I know a friend who did something like the port and the intravenous antibiotics for months, and they did really well for 2 years. And I said, where I'm at right now, I will take it, right? Like, if I could get 2 years. So I'm in the process right now of trying to figure out if I need to do more treatment and what exactly that is. But yeah, as far as my diet, it's just remained the same. When I'm traveling, it's really difficult, as you know. So I'm managing and I'm doing okay, but I'd like to be like doing 80% better, and not, not just 60, because I still have days where it's like I wake up and it just feels like somebody sucked all the energy out of me and I hurt all over. And then I have to go back to my methods of sort of getting myself back to a better place.
Yeah, I totally understand that. 60% is better than 0%, but 60% is still not 100%. And I don't even know how long I've not had 100%. So I don't know. So I can feel with the 80%. Yeah, like 80% means I'm feeling pretty darn good. So
Yeah.
I feel you there. Like, yeah, it's definitely like those pick and choose moments. You know, we have to pick and choose moments that we can live in our life, with autoimmune diseases, and with obviously with Lyme disease, which I honestly don't know a whole lot about. And so this has been very eye-opening for me. So thank you so much for sharing all of that information with us. So we're going to move on. You mentioned something about, I want to get on to like your personal career and that kind of thing, like what you do when you are feeling your 60% to 80% better. I mentioned a movie and a documentary, sorry. So can you kind of fill us in on what you do?
Yes. So I'm an independent director, producer, and writer. And my production company's Green Creek Productions. So I have been making films for many years, just shorts up until this last year. I put my first feature film out, and it was a documentary. It was very exciting because it premiered in Hollywood, Dances with Films, and then it got picked up for distribution by a production company, a small production company. Well, they're not that small, actually. They're getting bigger, out of Beverly Hills, and they have a really wonderfully diversified slate of films, which is smart because you have to survive. So they do everything from horror films to social, issues, dramas, and also their pet thing that they love is social issue documentaries, which is what my film falls under, Live Out Loud. So it's streaming on Vudu, Fandango now. So, and I think if you watch it on your phone, I think you can watch it for free, but obviously I wish that people would watch it on a bigger screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
dive into what the film's about.
So the film is about three folks I met in Portland, Oregon, who were unhoused, and they learned to make films in a grant-funded program. And it's really about how the process of making art helped give them self-esteem again and help them find new identities and realize their potential. So they were very transformed by the program. And so I could see that was my theory going in, and it held up. And so I said, if this really helps these people move forward with their lives, I would like to make a film that encourages other cities to create similar programs. And so instead of just, we with homelessness, we talk about the basics a lot, which is obviously critical: food, shelter, water. But if people don't get their self-esteem back and feel a sense of hope, it's really hard for them to turn their lives around. So I think that not just filmmaking, but I think really any type of art making, a process of learning to create something and gaining self-esteem is really critical for people who are coming off the streets. So it was an incredible experience. It was very difficult. I did just about everything myself up until post-production. And then I had a wonderful editor, Kelly Baker, I worked with. So I shot this film 10 years ago, and I kept doing other projects and then coming back to it. It was so daunting to figure, I was like, how am I ever going to put this film together? But thank God I found Kelly, and we made it work. And so it's the first film I've had that got picked up for distribution. And so now my next project, I am making a film about my own experience with Lyme disease. I'm still debating about the full scope of the film and whether I want to just focus on my journey with treatment and going into some experimental treatment, or if I want to talk about autoimmune disease and on a larger scale. So I'm still kind of kicking that around. There's so much happening right now in medicine in terms of how COVID research has accelerated research into Lyme disease and other diseases.
With that, a personal journey versus multiple people's journeys or autoimmune diseases, or even just, I mean, tick-borne illnesses. I mean, if you just went, it's such a huge scope too. That's going to be daunting and very cool though, once you figure out what angle you want to go into.
And for example, on the personal level, my new Lyme specialist, who I finally found through one of the top Lyme doctors in the country. You can't get in to see that guy. He's in Hyde Park, New York. Okay.
Okay.
The Quiet Epidemic. He's in the last big Lyme movie that came out, The Quiet Epidemic. It's streaming now. But I got in touch with this office and they helped me find somebody in Zionsville, Indiana. And I'm hopeful about this guy being a good fit to work with me. But we retested me for Lyme to see what was going to happen with and it was at a new lab in the US and at the Belgium lab. And then after we got those results back, he said, we had another discussion and about when I had COVID. I managed to not get COVID until the very end of last summer. Like, it was days away from the new vaccine coming out. And I was so pissed off because I was so careful through the whole pandemic. And that was a really hard thing for a lot of us who are immunocompromised, because our families and friends, all that negotiating, like people, like trying to explain to people, I can't take this chance. I'm sorry. I know it's your birthday, but because we waited longer to get back into society than other folks, because we're right.
We took longer. We took it way more serious than I think a lot of people did.
Yeah. When we reviewed that, he's like, do you feel like I was down for like 6 weeks when I got COVID, and I was terrified that I was not going to be able to get out of bed again. I was back where I started. And he said, okay, I think we need to test you for long COVID. Well, guess what? Testing for long COVID is controversial too. There's still I think a lot of my experience has just been like that. Like, it's hard, you get to the point where it's hard to know who to believe and who to trust. And yet what you have to go with is your own, like, these are my symptoms. This is what's working for me. This is what's working for me in my diet. Like, and as you know, I'm sure like you've experienced all of us experience, like, everybody wants to give you advice. So-and-so did this and it worked for them, and you should try this. And this person's taking these supplements, and it gets so annoying. And you're just like, everybody's body is different. So you have to really, first of all, trust your own intuition, I think. And there is just a lot of trial and error, and it's very expensive. And I am acutely aware that I am so privileged to even be able to seek treatment for Lyme, because so many people, they have spent so much money. They've gone through their life savings. They've lost their houses. They've lost their jobs. I've talked to people who lost everything, ended up like moving back in with a family member. It's a devastating disease financially for most of the people who get it. And then I'll try to, make a film that's going to help other people.
It sounds like you definitely want to make change happen. And I think that's one of the ways that it happens. Agree 100% on, you have to do what makes you feel better.
If anyone would like to check out my work, my website's melissagregoryrue.com, and it's RUE. Like the street, not the sauce, although I love the Rue sauce. So please go to my website, and there are links to Live Out Loud there, and you can get a link to watch the film. Also, I think it's really incredibly important that we start having more public service announcements to educate people how to protect themselves from Lyme disease, because due to climate change, these infectious diseases are exploding. And it's not going to be Lyme. It's not just going to be Lyme. It's as you know, Martha, the diseases that are down south and Central and South America are starting to move up here. So we really need to get people to stop, get their head out of the sand. I know it's hard. I think when you were talking about like trying to explain it to people, and I think people just don't want to, it's hard. Like people don't want to think like, if I go for a walk in the woods, I could get infected and be sick for the rest of my life. You know, and I didn't, you know, I was an avid outdoors person, and now it's I have to say, like, it's really hard for me to want to go walk in the woods. I never walk on grass without boots on up to my knees, and permethrin and picaridin is another, you know, people think of DEET. I hate DEET. Picaridin's really great for prevention. Wearing, you know, wearing long pants, all that kind of stuff. Like if you're going to be out in the woods, you really need to think about this stuff. If you have a dog, you need to make sure your dog is getting treated regularly so that they don't bring a tick in and infect you, or a cat. The two websites that I would most recommend are LymeDisease.org and LymeActionNetwork.org. And there's some websites that have very inaccurate information about Lyme disease. Those are two of the best, and those are the places you want to go if you want to know how to prevent it, if you want to know what to do if you find a tick. It has all that information. It has, and it also, if you think you might have Lyme disease and you want to kind of take a little test to see if you need to get evaluated. And also it will tell you which labs are the best labs in the country to go to, because the one that your doctor is going to send your blood to is not necessarily the one that knows what they're doing when it comes to diagnosing Lyme disease. So those are my big things, especially with kids. Like, please protect your kids. And like I said before, also make sure you save the tick, because you can it's much, much cheaper to send the tick or like an insect or whatever gets you to a lab and have it tested than it is to try and test a human.
I'll try to make sure I put this link down. I'm pretty sure there's a link where you can actually send off a tick that you pull off yourself, even if you don't feel like you need to go to the doctor. You can actually send it in and have it looked at. Touching base on what you said about like global change, my experience mainly is with alpha gal, as far as like family members having it. Just recently, within like the past 3 years, my brother-in-law had gotten diagnosed with it, and they live in Dover, Delaware. You know, you're not thinking that you're going to get bit by anything that's going to cause an issue. You're like, oh, if you're down south, it's a problem. And DEET, I'm allergic to DEET, so I have to use
picaridin is so much better. It doesn't smell bad. It doesn't, I mean, I have really highly sensitive skin. I have mast cell activation syndrome too, which I didn't even talk about, but I didn't bring it up because it's so common. Most everybody I know with Lyme disease also has mast cell activation syndrome. So
okay. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's just like it all is just hand in hand.
We're gonna wrap up this episode. So before we end, I ask everybody, is there anything that you want to say, anything at all? You have the floor right now.
Be open-minded and, you know, do what you can to protect yourself. That's my biggest message to people, because I would not wish Lyme disease on anyone. It's a really hard road. I know there are lots of other things people are dealing with where they feel unsupported by the medical community. So I hope people will start to have more compassion and understanding. I think there's a lot of, I guess this is one thing I didn't talk about, is how difficult those of us who have disabilities that are what we call invisible disabilities, because people look at me and they're like, what, you look fine, you know, what are you talking about? You know, there are a lot of people walking around with invisible disabilities, and I think we have dealt with so much hurtful situations with people not being understanding about our differences. And I know everybody I've talked to with a hidden disability says, I've lost family, I've lost friends. I have people I thought were like my best friend for life, and they just took off because they couldn't handle the fact that when we go out to eat, I have to ask questions of the wait person. It's like ridiculous. I mean, that is so inexcusable. Like, have some compassion and realize that there are people whose bodies are not like yours, and please, have some patience and try to educate yourself instead of making assumptions and telling people they're crazy, or just pushing them out of your life, I guess. So I'm sure you've had a lot of that experience too, Martha.
Yes, to say the least. Yes, I have. And I think a lot of our listeners can definitely empathize with that statement. So I'll make sure I have everything linked down below for Melissa, so you can check out her website, everything that she's got going on in her social media, and of course, check out her documentary. Go ahead and like this podcast, subscribe, ring the bell, all that good stuff, share, whatever platform you happen to be listening to, and we will talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.